Okay, so we've been walking through the Scrum cycle, which is a series of meetings in which people who are working together get together and they do coordinated work in Scrum. All right, so the last meeting in this cycle is called the Sprint Retrospective. And this is a meeting that is just for the Scrum team, and it's designed to help them improve their process, right? So at the end, you've worked together for, on the last sprint, which is maybe 1 or 2 weeks, depending on your sprint length, and lots of things happened. You made a forecast of how much work you would get done as a team, and then you delivered some, you didn't deliver some, but you want to actually start to look at, well, how do we get better together? Since Scrum is all about teams producing value. So there's a few pitfalls you got to think about when you're doing retrospectives or not. People always say to me, well, Cathy, we'll do a retrospective when all the work is done. I'm like, oh, okay. So the question I always ask them back is there ever been a time when you haven't had more work than you can do at one time? The answer is usually no. So this is a meeting that you do regardless of how much work you have. And the idea behind this meeting is that if you take a little time out of your work to look at how you're working together as a team, to look at what things worked for you and didn't, and to look at what do you want to try differently in the next sprint to make it better, you can start to increase your productivity without just increasing the amount of hours that you work, which actually is pretty cool if you ask me. So now I'm going to take you through a retrospective format, right? So that how do you do this retrospective, right? And there's a few things you do want to remember. So retrospectives are just for the Scrum team. So, right, we're going to talk about things. Sometimes we have to talk about difficult things, right, to really work well together. So we need to have a safe space. We always joke that the Las Vegas rule applies in Scrum. Like whatever happens in the retrospective stays in the retrospective. And that way, people can tell the truth, right? Because if something's not working, but my manager's sitting next to me and I don't feel like I can really say something's not working, then we kind of get stopped and nothing really happens, right? So we don't see the benefits that everybody talks about getting in Scrum. So only the Scrum team, which is made up of the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team, right? And then a safe space. So sometimes we set up some, ground rules. And I'll take you through this 5 stages of a retrospective. So this particular format is from a book called Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. It's by Esther Derby and Diana Larson, one of my all-time favorite books, because it really simply outlines how you can get a retrospective to give you the information that will help your team be better. So we start out with set the stage, right? Now, you're gonna have this retrospective and you gotta get everybody, kind of what I say is you gotta get everyone in the room, right? You gotta get their heads in the room because mostly we're thinking about 20 million other things and all this work. So in this set the stage, you might do a little exercise. Sometimes I do a really silly one like, what kind of car would you be if you were a car right now? And while that seems silly, people have to get present and they have to kind of be in the room and they have to say the silly thing and you get everybody to say something, which makes it easier for them to talk later, even if they're shy or they don't like talking so much. And then you decide on the goal of the retrospective. So, a goal might be, wow, how can we improve our release process, right? We might have had some problems with that. But in any case, everybody agrees on the rules. And then if there's some ground rules, right? Like I might ask everyone to agree that there's no wrong answers, right? Nobody's opinion is wrong and we just accept them all, right? So that's the first stage. The second stage, we want to gather data. So in gather data, we're looking at how do we generate ideas about what happened. And usually I joke, this is like the brainstorming, quantity over quality in this. And in the book, which I highly recommend, they give you lots of different activities for this. One of my favorites for gather data is let's look at everything that happened and just write on stickies. One thing, like let's look at our last sprint. The good, the bad, the ugly, it doesn't matter what it is, you just think what happened in this last sprint and you start writing. And you just, get people to write as many stickies as possible. And then you have data. So now that you have data, you can analyze data. You can get some answers from it. And that's the third stage. It's called generate insights. And this is where we're taking the stuff that we generated in the second stage and let's look at what it tells us. So this could be, we do a root cause analysis, we do a fishbone diagram. I do one here where I go, okay, we have all this data from what happened, in the sprint. Let's categorize it. How can we categorize this data? Maybe is there things that just happen in one time, right? So I might have a couple of headers. Like one would be, all right, let's sort this data, things that just happen one time. And then let's sort it, that's another one, like things that happen every sprint. Because there we'll get at some of the meat at where we're not functioning as well as we could, right? So we go through that, we talk a lot, and then we're gonna get to something. We're gonna find out something, hopefully, that we can see would make a difference for us. And then we come to the fourth stage, which is where we wanna decide as a team, well, what do we wanna do? What's one experiment that we can try in our next sprint to make our process better and get some empirical data, right? Like Scrum is all about using the empirical process of inspect and adapt to make things better based on actual reality, not just our hunches and feelings. So when we're deciding what we're gonna do, we think, well, what's something the whole team could do? What's something that could make a difference that we could track? And what's something that we can make sure that we do? So we don't end up with a laundry list of like, oh, we're gonna do 30 things, because nothing will happen. And we just do one thing, and we're gonna feed that thing that we decide to do into our sprint plan so that we actually make sure as a team that there's time and space and we're talking about it every day when we do our daily Scrum. So that's deciding what to do. Again, it's all important that everybody is in agreement, that the whole team decides together, that it's not just like one person's like, this is what we're gonna do, and everyone has to listen to them. So we get to consensus on decide what to do, and then we close. And close is really important, right? The Scrum as a cycle has a beginning and an end. We do it in the same cadence every time. And this is then, we call them Scrum ceremonies. So this is the part of the ceremony where we get to acknowledge the work. We get to celebrate what we accomplished. We get to acknowledge our teammates. We really want to go out kind of on understanding the value that we added. So that is the close. This whole thing together, again, in that book you can find lots of different little games and stuff to do. The most important thing I think about retrospectives though, is that you don't do it the same way every time. Everybody that I work with is super smart. And once we know how something's gonna go, our brains take over. I check out and I'm now on autopilot. So if you're sitting in retrospectives and you notice that they're always the same and they're the same questions, that's a pretty good sign that you need to come up with a new one. And my goal is to, as a Scrum Master, as when I'm going in and coaching teams, is to be looking and being with the team through the sprint. And so that I can actually have an idea, well, what's going on, right? People in the middle, in the fishbowl, can't always see what's happening, right? So the really cool thing about my role of being a coach or a Scrum Master is that I stand back a little bit and I look at the interactions during the sprint and I try to get an idea about what would make a difference for the team. And then I construct these different games and these different stages to help people on the team get a sense of what those things are, uncover stuff for themselves so it's new, so they're discovering. And then when they decide what to do, it's real for them. They're not just going through the motions. So that's what I'd say. Have a retrospective every sprint. Doesn't have to take a whole day. Plan it out, make it interesting, make it unexpected so that people are engaged. Take one action as a team, feed it into your sprint plan, celebrate the people on the team, and make sure it's not boring. Really, this is the way that teams increase their productivity, increase their happiness, increase their satisfaction, and ultimately, the way good teams become great.